The Beatles arriving in America in 1964 has been such a well-documented pop cultural event. So my first question goes to David. David, how did you approach telling that story once again with maybe providing a new angle?
Well, of course, that was the challenge, the real challenge in telling this story is it's a very famous story. Um, we had access to this restored footage that Albert and David Maysles filmed. And although Albert and David Maysles became very famous filmmakers, at the time they were relatively unknown. They had only made one other film. Um, when we looked at the footage, uh, there are many, it's a treasure trove of footage. Um, but especially what drew my attention was the young women and young men. I felt like I'd never seen fans speak so clearly about what they were going through and how much they loved the Beatles. And in a way, it became a story about youth. You know, these very young fans and these four very young guys. George is 20, Ringo is 23, and the rest of them are in between. And it just organically, we started to focus on those issues.
Obviously, you're both no strangers to the Beatles microcosm, as you had previously worked with Olivia Harrison on the George Harrison documentary Living in a Material World. So, how did this project come about?
Project, like you said, we developed a wonderful friendship and working partnership with Olivia Harrison when we were working on George Harrison Living in the Material World. And we remained, close with her over the years. And we also knew Jonathan Clyde at Apple and had worked with their archival team before when we were working on the George Harrison documentary. And unbeknownst to us, the Apple had sent this incredible 16 millimeter original footage, original camera negative to Peter Jackson's company, Park Road Post-Production. And they had started this 3-year extensive process of scanning and cleaning up and restoring this footage so that it looks as beautiful as it does in the film. And they also have this incredible sound technology, sound restoration technology, that's part of their wingnut MAL system. And when we came on board, because basically it was just kind of a conversation that Apple had that Marty Scorsese and David Tedeschi and I are all from New York. It's a New York story. We also make documentaries about these kinds of cultural moments. And so when we finally came on board and were sent this footage, we just were astounded by the way this footage came to life. There were no artifacts of time or age between your experience of this moment, because Peter Jackson's team had just, kind of removed it. They had peeled back all the layers of time. And so this footage and this sound is just miraculous.
And I would add, one of the reasons they might have, thought of us is both Marty and I knew Al Maysles. And I worked for Maysles at the very beginning of my career as a production assistant, off and on. And Scorsese had met them, and I don't even know the context. I think he pitched something with them in the late 60s. And then later on, Scorsese hired Al Maysles to shoot for Shine a Light, behind the scenes and rehearsals. And I shadowed him just to learn, to see what the heck he was up to. And it was really, they had a very special energy, David and Albert Maysles. It was very interesting to see Al getting moments from people that one had the feeling that someone else couldn't do.
Having done such an extensive amount of research for that movie, I was wondering, did you come to any new conclusions for yourselves regarding the Beatles?
Well, I would say two things. That there was footage out there. It was very surprising that there was footage out there that hadn't been seen. So there's 17 minutes of new Maysles footage that we expected. But there's a lot of things that just were buried in archives or local Miami archives that were quite beautiful. That's one thing. And then going back to that theme of youth, I hadn't remembered how much there was an establishment that didn't like the Beatles and were against the Beatles and worked against their success. So when they land in New York, the great war correspondent, Eric Severide, does a piece for CBS News where he compares the Beatles to the German measles. I hadn't remembered that. That was a big surprise.
It was also really surprising, the David's idea of interviewing people who had been profoundly transformed by hearing the Beatles for the first time, seeing the Beatles for the first time. And when we set those interviews up, it was, and started researching who we wanted to talk to, it was really incredibly surprising to see how emotional people still feel about this event that happened 60 years ago. And, to get people talking about it, it felt like those memories were very much on the surface. This was not an old thing that happened a long time ago. This is still very present in their lives.